In all my years, I've seen that the loudest crises are often just a cover for the quietest pain. A family comes to me, their world on fire, pointing at a single spark and screaming, "That's the arsonist!" But I've learned you don't look at the spark. You look at what the whole house is made of. And in this case, the house was soaked in gasoline long before the match was ever struck. When I first sat down with Jenna and her family, the air in the room was thick enough to choke on. You could feel the history, the years of unspoken rules and expectations. On one side, you had mom and dad, let's call them Carol and David. They looked like the picture of parental concern. But if you look closer, you saw the tight grip in their hands, the set of their jaws. Their fear was real, but it was tangled up with something else, a loss of control. On the other side sat Jenna, 21 years old, dressed in black, arms crossed so tight it looked like she was trying to hold herself together. Her eyes darted everywhere but at her parents. She had this defiant shield up, a wall of anger and indifference. But that kind of wall is never built to keep others out. It's built to keep the hurt in. The story they told me, the one they told the world, was simple. Their bright, ambitious daughter, the one who was on a full scholarship to a great university, had met a boy, Leo. And overnight, she had become a different person. She dropped a class. She started staying out late. She was disrespectful, secretive, and defiant. The villain was clear in their narrative. Leo, he was older, a musician with no real job. And in their eyes, he was a predator who had brainwashed their daughter. They used all the hot button words, out of control, manipulated, throwing her future away. They came to me to fix her, to save her from this guy. But I wasn't looking at Jenna. I was listening to the music behind the words. I was looking at the family system. When a system is this rigid, any deviation feels like an earthquake. What they called out of control, I saw as a desperate grasp for control over her own life. What they called brainwashed, I saw as a young woman finally listening to a voice, any voice that wasn't theirs. I let them talk. I let the accusations fly. Carol cried about the daughter she'd lost, the one who used to tell her everything. David, a man who clearly saw the world in black and white, spoke about broken trust and the disrespect for everything they had provided her, and Jenna just sat there simmering. Every word they said was another brick in that wall she was hiding behind. My first impression of Jenna wasn't of a girl who was out of control. It was of a girl who had been so tightly controlled for so long that she didn't know how to be free without shattering the cage. She hadn't learned to open the door and walk out. She had to dynamite the whole structure. And Leo, he wasn't the mastermind, he was the dynamite. He was the permission she felt she needed to finally blow things up. The problem wasn't that she was with Leo. The problem was why a person like Leo was so appealing to her in the first place. That's where the truth was. Not in their fights about him, but in the years before him, in the silence, in the unspoken contracts of their family. They wanted me to get rid of the boyfriend. But my job wasn't to perform an exorcism on this relationship. My job was to help Jenna figure out who she was without him and without their suffocating expectations. Because until she did that, she'd just find another Leo and another and another. The problem wasn't the symptom, it was the disease. And that disease was a profound lack of an authentic self. To understand what was happening with Jenna, I had to peel back the years. You don't just wake up one day at 21 and decide to detonate your life. That's a slow burn. The fuse gets lit years, sometimes decades earlier. So I started asking questions, not about Leo, but about Jenna, about the little girl she used to be. The picture that emerged was so common it's heartbreaking. It was the perfect child syndrome. From the outside, Jenna's childhood was idyllic. Good schools, nice home, piano lessons, soccer trophies. Carol and David were doting parents. They were at every game, every recital. They gave her everything she needed and most of what she wanted. But there was a price tag on all of it, an invisible one. The price was compliance. Love and approval in that household weren't a given, they were a reward for performance. An A on a report card earned a hug and a "we're so proud of you." A B earned a what? Happened, you're better than this. Are you not applying yourself? I watched tapes of their home life they submitted. You could see it clearly. Jenna, maybe 7 or 8 years old, would come home upset about something at school, maybe a friend being mean. Carol's immediate response wasn't, "Tell me how that made you feel." It was, "Well, don't be so sensitive. You need to have a thicker skin. Just ignore her." David was even more direct. His world was about solutions, not emotions. Upset. Why? Being upset doesn't fix it. What's the plan to solve the problem? Over time, a child in that environment learns a very dangerous lesson. My feelings are wrong. My feelings are an inconvenience. To be loved, I must perform. I must be the happy, successful, untroubled daughter they want me to be. So she did. She became a master of it. She was the star student, the responsible one, the one everyone could count on. But she was living a role, not a life. Inside, she was building a huge reservoir of unexpressed feelings, anger, frustration, sadness, loneliness, all the normal, messy parts of being human that had no place in their perfect family portrait. She was a pressure cooker, and the lid was screwed on tight. Year after year, the pressure built. High school was more of the same, only with higher stakes. The pressure for the right grades, the right college, the right future. Her parents weren't tyrants. They genuinely believed they were doing what was best for her. Their own histories were filled with struggle, and they wanted to pave a smooth road for their daughter. What they didn't realize is that by removing every obstacle, they also removed her chance to develop her own navigation skills, her own sense of self. They weren't raising a person, they were curating a resume. Then she went to college. For the first time, she was out of their direct line of sight. She was exposed to people who didn't know her as Carol and David's perfect daughter. She was just Jenna, and she had no idea who that was. It's a terrifying place to be. That's when Leo walked in. He wasn't just a boy, he was an answer. He was everything she wasn't allowed to be. He was spontaneous where she was scheduled. He was emotional and expressive where she was repressed. He lived for his art, his music, with no thought to a 5-year plan or a 401. He saw her, the girl behind the perfect mask, and he didn't ask her to be anything else. He liked the messy, angry, confused part of her, because he was probably a little messy, angry, and confused himself. When Jenna talked about Leo, her face would light up in a way it never did when she talked about her academic achievements. "He just gets me," she'd say. "I can be myself with him. I don't have to pretend." And there it is, the core of it all. He wasn't her problem, he was her solution. He was the first person who gave her permission to feel her own feelings. Of course she clung to that. It was like a lifeline to a drowning person. Her parents saw him as pulling her under, but from her perspective, he was the only one keeping her head above water. The rebellion, the dropped class, the late nights wasn't really about him. It was about her. It was the first time she was making choices, albeit poor ones, that were truly her own. They were a clumsy, desperate attempt to claim an identity she was never allowed to build. The problem was, she was building it in reaction to her parents, not in service to herself. She was running from them, not running to a genuine future of her own design. The collision was inevitable. You have this rigid, unyielding system, the family, and this new chaotic force. Jenna's bid for independence, when they met, sparks were guaranteed to fly, and they did. The escalation began not with a bang, but with 1,000 tiny paper cuts. It started when Carol, in what she called a moment of mother's intuition, went through Jenna's phone records and saw the sheer volume of calls and text to Leo's number, often late at night. Now, let's stop right there. The moment a parent feels they have to become a detective, the trust is already dead. That act isn't about protection, it's about control. It's a violation born of fear. So Carol confronts Jenna, not with, "Hey, I'm worried about you, let's talk," but with an accusation. "Who is this boy? Why are you obsessed with him? You're supposed to be studying." The message wasn't one of concern for Jenna's well-being, but of concern for her performance. Jenna's reaction was textbook for someone who has been suppressed for 2 decades. She didn't apologize or explain. She attacked. "Why were you going through my phone? You have no right. It's none of your business." It became a fight about privacy, not about the actual issue. This is a classic diversionary tactic. When you can't defend your position, you attack the process. And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. From that point on, every interaction was a power struggle. Her parents tightened the leash, and Jenna fought harder to break it. They started demanding to know where she was every second of the day. They put a curfew on her, a 21-year-old college student. David tried to use logic and leverage. He'd say things like, "We pay for your car, we pay for your tuition. As long as you're under our financial roof, you're under our rule." He thought he was being rational, a CEO managing an underperforming asset. What he was actually doing was turning their relationship into a transaction, stripping it of all love and reducing it to a contract. Carol, on the other hand, used emotion as her weapon. There were tears, there was guilt. "How could you do this to me after everything we've sacrificed for you? We had such a close relationship, and this boy has destroyed it." She was framing Jenna's newfound independence as a personal betrayal, a rejection of her as a mother. This is emotional blackmail, pure and simple. It's designed to make the other person feel so guilty that they surrender their own needs to appease you. Of course, none of this worked. It just pushed Jenna further away and deeper into her relationship with Leo. He became her sanctuary. Her parents' house was a war zone of judgment and control, while his small apartment was a haven of acceptance. Every time her father threatened to take away her car, Leo was there to give her a ride. Every time her mother cried and made her feel guilty, Leo was there to say, "You're not crazy. Your feelings are valid." They were actively making him the hero of her story. They were casting him as the brave knight, saving the princess from the dragon. When they couldn't see, they were the ones breathing fire. The big explosion happened over Thanksgiving break. Jenna brought up the idea of going on a weekend trip with Leo. The reaction was nuclear. It was an absolute no. David laid down the law. And when Jenna pushed back, he delivered the ultimatum that so many parents think is a trump card. If you walk out that door with him, don't bother coming back. It's him or this family. He thought he was showing strength. He thought he was drawing a line in the sand that would force her back into compliance. He fundamentally misread his daughter. He was dealing with the old Jenna, the performer, the people pleaser. He didn't realize that person was already gone. The new Jenna, the one desperate for an identity, heard that ultimatum not as a threat, but as a choice between a life of suffocating control and a life of perceived freedom. She looked at her father, her face cold, and said, "Fine." And she walked out. That was the moment the floor fell out from under them. That's when they panicked. Their ultimate weapon, The threat of withholding their love and support had failed. They had lost all control, and in that desperation, they called me. They didn't come for understanding. They came for reinforcement. They wanted me to be a bigger, louder version of them, to finally make Jenna listen. They had no idea what they were really in for. When they all sat down on my stage, the tension was a living thing in the room. Carol and David came in with their binders full of evidence, phone records, printouts of Leo's social media, a list of Jenna's transgressions. They were prepared for a legal battle. They wanted to present their case, have me rule in their favor, and sentence their daughter back to the life they had designed for her. Jenna sat as far away from them as she could, a storm cloud of resentment. Leo wasn't there yet. I always start with the family system first. You have to understand the environment before you introduce the outside element. I let Carol and David lay out their entire case. I listened patiently as they painted the picture of their perfect daughter stolen away by this older, manipulative musician. They used words like brainwashed, delusional, and throwing her life away. They talked about her bright future, the one they had planned, now in jeopardy. After about 20 minutes of this, I held up my hand. Okay, I've heard what you think, I said, looking directly at them. I've heard about your fear, your disappointment, your anger, but I haven't heard a single word about what Jenna wants, what Jenna feels, what Jenna thinks. You've described her like a car that's been stolen and taken for a joyride. You haven't described her as a person. That stopped them cold. You could see the confusion on their faces. They thought they were talking about her. David started to speak, but we are talking about her. We're talking about her future, her safety. No, I interrupted, keeping my voice calm but firm. You're talking about your expectations for her future. You're talking about your definition of safety. You spent this entire time talking about a resume, not a daughter. Let me ask you this. I leaned forward. When was the last time you asked Jenna with no agenda, honey, are you happy? Silence. A deep, profound silence. Carol's eyes filled with tears, but these were different tears. Not tears of frustration, but tears of dawning realization. David just stared, his jaw working. He's a man who deals in facts and figures, and I had just presented him with a data point he had no category for. Then I turned to Jenna. The wall was still up, but I could see a crack in it. Jenna, I said softly, they see a villain. They see this guy, Leo, as the source of all this trouble. But he's not the problem, is he? He's the symptom. She looked at me for the first time, really looked at me. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The problem, I continued looking back at her parents, is that for 21 years, Jenna has been an actress in a play that you wrote, you directed, and you produced. She's done a great job. She deserves an award. But she's tired of the role. She wants to write her own script now, and because she's never been allowed to hold a pen before, it's messy, it's clumsy, she's making mistakes, but they are her mistakes. Leo isn't the author of this new script. He's just the first character she's cast who isn't one of you. This is the moment of confrontation. It's not about yelling, it's about holding up a mirror, a clear, unflinching mirror. And for many people, seeing their own reflection for the first time is a shocking and painful experience. David tried to deflect. So you're saying this is our fault, that we're bad parents for wanting the best for our daughter? It's a classic blame shift. If you feel attacked, you reframe the argument to make the other person the aggressor. This isn't about fault, I said. Fault is a useless concept here. This is about truth. The truth is you have parented out of fear. Fear she wouldn't succeed. Fear she wouldn't be safe. Fear she wouldn't live up to the potential you saw in her. But parenting out of fear creates a child who is afraid to fail, afraid to disappoint, and most of all, afraid to be herself. And when the pressure of that fear becomes too much, they will find any escape valve they can. For Jenna, that escape valve is named Leo. Then I brought Leo out. He was exactly what you'd expect, a bit scruffy, articulate, and calm. He wasn't the monster they had described. He was just a guy. I asked him one question: what do you love about Jenna? He didn't talk about her looks or how she made him feel. He said, I love her mind. She's brilliant, and I love the fire in her. She spent her whole life trying to put it out, and I just want to see what happens if she lets it burn. I looked over at Jenna. A single tear was rolling down her cheek. It was the first honest emotion I had seen from her. In that moment, her parents weren't seeing the manipulative deadbeat they had imagined. They were seeing a man who saw a quality in their daughter, her fire that they had spent her entire life trying to extinguish. That was the breakthrough. It wasn't about them liking him. It was about them finally, maybe for the first time, understanding why she did. That moment hung in the air. The truth had finally been spoken aloud, and the silence it left behind was heavy with unspoken apologies and years of misunderstanding. You could see the gears turning in David's mind. He was a logical man, and for the first time, he was presented with a logic that superseded his own. The equation wasn't Jenna plus Leo equals disaster. The equation was control plus fear X. 21 years equals rebellion. He didn't like the answer, but he couldn't deny the math. Carol was the first to break. It wasn't a dramatic sob, but a quiet, crumbling recognition. We just love her so much, she whispered, her voice cracking. We were just so scared of losing her. I know you do. I said, my voice softer now. But Carol, you were losing her. You were losing her long before Leo ever showed up. You were losing her every time you corrected her feelings instead of validating them. You were losing her every time your pride in her accomplishments was louder than your love for her soul. You were so busy building a perfect life for her that you forgot to let her build a life with you. I turned to Jenna. The tear had been followed by others, and her defensive posture had melted away. She just looked exhausted. Jenna, I said, this isn't about choosing them or choosing him. This has never been about them or him. This is about choosing you. For the first time in your life, the problem is you've outsourced your sense of self for so long, first to your parents and now to Leo, that you don't even know what you're choosing. I looked at Leo, and you, son, you may have good intentions, you may see the fire in her, but what you're doing is validating her rebellion, not her identity. You're giving her a safe place to hide from her parents, but you're not pushing her to stand on her own 2 feet. You've become another crutch. A different kind of crutch, but a crutch nonetheless. This is the hardest part of the process. You have to deconstruct everyone's role in the dysfunction. No one gets to be the pure hero or the pure villain. The parents aren't evil, they're loving but misguided. The boyfriend isn't a predator, he's a catalyst and an enabler. And the daughter isn't just a victim, she's a willing participant in a new pattern that's just as unhealthy as the old one. She traded a gilded cage for a comfortable foxhole, but she still wasn't living out in the open. So here's the deal. I laid it out for all of them. This stops being about Leo today. The debate over whether he's a good guy or a bad guy is a distraction. It's irrelevant. The real work starts now. I gave them a plan, a difficult one. For Jenna, the task was to find out who she was, independent of anyone else's approval. That meant individual therapy. It meant re-engaging with her studies, not for her parents, but for herself, to see if that's what she truly wanted. It meant taking a step back from the relationship with Leo, not necessarily ending it, but de-intensifying it. Moving the focus from us against the world to me for myself. She needed to learn to self-validate, to sit with her own uncomfortable feelings without needing him to tell her it was okay. For Carol and David, their work was even harder. They had to learn to let go. They had to transition from being managers of her life to being consultants, available only when asked. This meant no more tracking her phone, no more ultimatums, no more emotional guilt trips. They had to learn to zip it, to listen twice as much as they talked. Their new job was not to approve or disapprove of her choices, but to love the person making them unconditionally. I recommended they get into family counseling to learn a whole new language for communicating, one based on I feel statements instead of you or accusations. And for Leo, I told him straight, if you really care about her, you'll support this. You'll encourage her to find her own strength, even if it means she becomes less dependent on you. The greatest gift you can give her right now is space. The outcome of these situations is never a tidy bow at the end of the show. Life doesn't work that way. Real change is a slow, grinding, and often painful process. They left my stage not with a magical solution, but with a roadmap and a choice. They could choose to follow it, or they could choose to go back to their comfortable dysfunction. In the follow-up a few months later, I learned that they were trying. It wasn't perfect. David still struggled with his need to offer solutions. Carol sometimes slipped back into guilt-inducing language. Jenna and Leo had taken a break, which was painful for both of them, but she admitted it was necessary. She was seeing a therapist on campus and had, for the first time, picked a major based on her own passion, not its earning potential. She told me about a recent phone call with her mom. She had been stressed about an exam, and instead of Carol saying, "You better study hard," she said, "That sounds really stressful. Just do your best and know that we love you no matter what." Jenna said she cried after that call, not from sadness, but from relief. That's the victory. It's not the grand, dramatic reconciliation. It's the small shift. It's changing a single sentence. It's replacing fear with trust. They hadn't fixed their daughter. They had begun to free her. And in doing so, they were freeing themselves. They were learning to love the daughter they had, not the one they thought they were supposed to have. The house was still standing. They hadn't rebuilt it overnight, but they had stopped soaking it in gasoline. They were learning, finally, to let in some air and some light, trusting that a little bit of fire, Jenna's fire, wouldn't burn the whole thing down. It would just make it warmer.